们有请本场次主持人谢丰荣策展人上台引言，请大家掌声欢迎。
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the International Conference of the Curators Intensive Taipei 2024. For our first section this afternoon, we are honored to have Jun Yap with us. She will be sharing her insights on the vital role of curating and arts in addressing the urgent climate and ecological crisis of our time. Before we invite her to the stage, I would like to give a brief introduction. Jun Yap is the Director of Curatorial and Research at the Singapore Art Museum, where she oversees content creation and museum programming. Her prior roles include Guggenheim UBS MAP Curator, South and Southeast Asia, Deputy Director and Curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art Singapore, and Curator at the Singapore Art Museum. Amongst the exhibitions she has curated are the Singapore Biennale 2022, named Natasha, The Gift, as part of the curatorial collaboration, Collecting Entanglements and Embodied Histories. Nanjum Pike, The Future is Now, at the National Gallery Singapore. They Do Not Understand Each Other, co-curated with National Museum of Art, Osaka, at Taikun Contemporary in Hong Kong. No Country, Contemporary Art for South and Southeast Asia, as part of the Guggenheim UBS MAP Global Art Initiative. The Cloud of Unknowing at the 54th Venice Biennale with artist Ho Zunian. The Future of Exhibition, It Feels Like I Have Been Here Before, at the Institute of Contemporary Art Singapore. Paradise is Elsewhere at IFA in Germany. Media art exhibitions, Interrupt and Twilight Tomorrow at the Singapore Art Museum. She is also the author of Retrospective, a historiographical aesthetic in contemporary Singapore and Malaysia, 2016. Without further ado, let's welcome Jun.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this panel, to have this opportunity to have this conversation with panelists and also yourselves. I feel very fortunate to have this time with many friends from around the world. And as we are reconvening after lunch, I imagine you might have some post-lunch fatigue. So I made a presentation that's a bit like a walk in the park. So there's a lot of talk about trees. And perhaps with that plant fiber, you will also have good digestion. Okay. So my topic is on nature, and that means also we will be looking very much at the outdoors as a space for exhibition and creative expression. And I wanted to pick up on Ho's presentation earlier in relation to this, where she said that we should really, she stressed the importance of thinking beyond the art world. And that this is a space of responsibility for us, even as we are looking at art. And I think when we start to look at nature, that also comes into play, whereby we have to consider the wider world that we're part of. So let me begin my presentation. It's titled Nature of Nature. So there are numerous entry points which have been generously provided by the conference organizers with crucial topics and concerns that benefit from collective consideration, thus contributing to more complex global perspectives and understandings. While such collective perspectives may appear abstract and beyond us as individuals, they have the potential to galvanize us for an invigorating transformation realized together. And in the context of a conference on curating, our gathering here together presupposes the deeper belief that curatorial and artistic practices have their roles to play in directing attention to conditions, in reimagining realities, and in offering alternatives. As such, I really appreciate the conference directions. So in planning my presentation, I found myself pondering over the word landscape, featured so prominently within the conference title. It is a word that has had renewed meaning for me in relation to my research over time. In an earlier stage of this research, my reading of landscape was with reference to nationalism and history, seen as necessarily and inevitably intertwined. These three elements, landscape, nation, and history, tend to go together. Simply described, there is the earthly ground that we stand upon, and then there is land that is more than its geography with its political, social, historical significance and constructs. Beyond that, there is the genre of landscape in art, with its 16th century Dutch originating term, Landschaft, appreciated in its contrast to the urban environment through its invocation of nature and even suggestion of the transcendental, extended in an expression of inner vitality and ideals, and then sometimes falling back as more subtle background scenery. Incidentally, I was also very curious about the Mandarin translation of the conference title, where the word landscape, as I understand, also refers to scene in a sense of conditions, as opposed to just being about the physical terrain. But nevertheless, that connects with what I will share, though perhaps in a slightly different entry point. So as the title of my presentation states, instead of speaking about landscape, I shall speak on nature. To summarize my presentation rather reductively, it could be said that landscape is political and nature is ideological, the latter being the space of my current interests. And given the space of the curatorial is central to this conference, we might then also reflect upon the implications of such a statement for our present time and the environment, not to mention what evolution, registered also within the conference title, could suggest for such an organic, purposeful, or systematic change. Certainly, a significant change we are faced with today in relation to land and landscape is that of climate, and its incontrovertible shifts from which arise both urgencies of action and concerns of nature. Weather instability and unpredictability, land subsidence and movement, rising temperatures and sea levels reveal our vulnerability as humans as much as they point to our culpability and responsibility. So in response, there has been an increasing awareness in and artworks on our environment and climate in a multitude of forms and with different levels of scrutiny and imagination. So I feel that there could be an interesting discussion on just this alone, perhaps beyond this panel, on the representation, engagement, and effect of this subject, as much as I would touch on some aspects here. So I would like to start by going back to the pandemic, that in 2 quick years seemed to have become a distant dream, though we have not entirely left it behind. The virus too continues to evolve. If you would go back in time with me, I would like to recall the arrival of the pandemic that ground movement to a halt, when our impact as humans was momentarily stilled. I live in the middle of the city in Singapore, and the sound of traffic and bustle is a constant. But during the lockdown, this changed dramatically. The streets were silent. Over a matter of weeks, birds returned, their songs so clearly heard in the mornings and evenings. The roads, now free of cars, came under threat of curbside weeds that grew wildly into this emptied space. Trees were not pruned, and they turned a street into a park. The city stopped being a city for a while. During this time, too, we were preparing for the Singapore Biennale, meant to open in 2022. In 2022, which we had given the name Natasha. The idea of naming was more than just a pinning of a name in lieu of an exhibition title. It went deeper than that. Naming was for us about relations, observing how humans relate to our world through naming, identifying, framing what is around us. That in turn defines how we respond to these named beings, non-beings, objects, spaces, and even time and ideas. Naming creates a universe. So as part of the Biennale and with botany on my mind, there were a few projects through which I began to develop further with my ideas and interests in this field, and I'll share briefly on a few of these projects. Angkrit Achari Yasofon, I had known him for many years, during which time he had introduced me to a piece of family land that he was experimenting with, though not specifically as artwork. Angkrit's interest was in what was ostensibly farming at the time and had been sparked by Japanese farmer and philosopher Masanobu Fukuoka. In particular, the One Straw Revolution that Fukuoka had published in 1978 in Japanese. Fukuoka was a laboratory scientist who had pivoted to the farm and his idea of natural farming on the island of Shikoku in southern Japan. Fukuoka was convinced that crops grow themselves and should not have to be grown, epitomized in his method of do-nothing farming, which would not require machines, chemicals, and very little weeding. To him, while simultaneously contributing to spiritual health, to him, the natural fertility of the earth is already evidenced all around us. Take a walk to the wild mountainside and look at the giant trees that grow without fertilizer and without cultivation. The fertility of nature as it is beyond reach of the imagination. This Angkrit applied to his family land that had become depleted, and indeed revegetation was one of Fukuoka's strategies. In drawing attention to Fukuoka and his philosophy, Angkrit's work for the Biennale was a video that presented his family land more than 10 years after he had begun working on it. Transformed and now lush with ponds of fish, ducks living with cows, and in particular a rescue cow named Ang Pao, who became a bit of a protagonist in the film when she wandered off one day and went missing for a few. She was found 3 days later and seemed to have gotten pregnant in the time she was away. In the inset image, you see some missing cow flyers that Angkrit had made, which were distributed around the town and neighbors in an attempt to locate Ang Pao. This next work involves a sculptural installation with a live banyan tree by the Malaysian artist Hsieh Sulaiman. Wood is increasingly a key material in Sushi's oeuvre, not just in its organic material and its potential for craftsmanship and carving and sculptural form, but also in its historical, architectural, and mythological significance. This work features the creature and story of Sang Kancil, the name given to a mouse deer in various Malay fables from the region. Often depicted as capable of outwitting his fellow animal peers, the mouse deer is a symbol of intelligence. In this installation, Hsieh Sulaiman imagines Sang Kancil's encounter with the pohong beringin, or banyan tree, for a story she had created for her daughter. The banyan tree occupies an important position in Malay cosmology. It is also known as the tree of life. And within the artwork and Sushi's tale, it marks the threshold between the spiritual world and the human world. This artwork is currently still standing on Lazarus Island off the southern coast of Singapore. Furthermore, what was significant about this project was how it unfolded over time. A period of almost 5 years, and in serendipitous coincidences, bringing together 3 individuals. The cultivating of his independent form as a sapling taken from the banyan tree of the substation, which was an important alternative art space in Singapore. And this was through the hands of our Biennale project manager, Annabelle Orr, who had not seen the tree after that. Second, myself, adopting the sapling, but lacking a garden in urban living, and thus sharing it with the third pair of hands in the artist Hsieh Sulaiman, who would transform it into this installation with a new life and story. The third work, likewise, comprises live plants, brought together by the Hong Kong artist Trevor Yong, developed in an observation of the increased demand for and sales of houseplants during the pandemic period. As we were confined indoors, we seemed to have felt a need to bring the outdoors inside with us for comfort or company. And the installation is both a commentary on the relationship between plants and humans, as well as a platform to facilitate the donation and adoption of unwanted plants. The idea was to encourage public to drop off their unwanted plants anonymously, even in the dead of the night, in case one felt guilty performing this act in public view under broad daylight. In the company of each other, these orphaned plants in fact thrived very well during the Biennale period, growing quite joyously, which one could say absolved their past owners of any guilt that they might have had. That said, the artist's interest was actually more human than plant, even though he has green fingers and is a trove of knowledge on plants. And the plants were in the work a means to contemplate the conflicted emotion of regret. This fourth project is by Lucy Davis, Tini Aleman, and Zachary Chan, that extends from a text by playwright Alfian Sa'at titled Talking in Trees, published in Antenna, the Journal of Nature in Visual Culture. Its presentation is an immersive universe of resonances echoing across botanical forms, language, and the sounds of nature. Within his text, Alfian deconstructs the vegetal references in the Malay language, which is an Austronesian language spoken by close to 300 million people living in Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore. Alfian's textual evidence certainly cements our intrinsic affinity for plant life, which Trevor's Pavilion of Regret taps into in their pandemic comfort and company. In regarding the form of the tree, Alfian shares a wonderful nugget of information that the term pokok, tree, is used to refer to what is most important and fundamental. In English, one would probably say basically or essentially, but in Malay, one would say pokoknya, the tree. For example, pokoknya kita harus berhati-hati would mean basically we need to be careful. Conversely, ranting, twig, refers to the trivial. Perkara ranting means minor matters. The text provides multiple examples that proves Alfian's point on the proximity of plant life to our life and human language. But it is his broader provocation that is most meaningful. He asks, how would we treat this earth if we thought of selfhood as planthood? Working with these artists allowed me to delve deeper into our botanical natures, to which I was also keen to then consider their conceptual frames and grounds. So besides Masanobu Fukuoka, another reference point I'd like to share is that of Arnes, a Norwegian philosopher, a contemporary of Fukuoka. What you read on this slide is his definition of deep ecology, a term he coined to describe his idea of an ecocentric mindset. Naes proposed a relational total field model, which he called a unified ecosophy, or a philosophy of ecological harmony or equilibrium. The list you read here comes from a lecture he presented in 1972 titled The Shallow and the Deep Long-Range Ecology Movement. I will not read all of this because I know I'll run out of time as a result, but I'll just show you the slide and we can come back to it if you're interested. But it represents, you can see the key elements there where rejection of man in environment in favor of relational total field image. Number 2 is biospherical egalitarianism. Number 4 is anti-class posture, and so on. So we can come back to this if you wish. So similar to Fukuoka, Naes's idea has been used to articulate new ways of reading, of relating with the world around us. And I'll share, this is the second one I'll share with you, or third one I'll share with you. This is Stefano Mancuso, a botanist specializing in plant neurobiology, with his text, The Nation of Plants, where instead of observing with human-centric eyes, he imagines plants attempting to save humans. Like Fukuoka and Naes, Mancuso argues that perceiving plants as being much closer to the inorganic world than to the fullness of life is committing a fundamental error of perspective, which will cost us dearly. Like Alfian, he elaborates on from the position of planthood, but he also makes the point that humans need plants more than plants need humans, and that the nation of plants is the only true and eternal planetary power. So here you see then his Bill of Rights for the nation of plants, and just running through very quickly, the earth shall be the common home of life, not of every living being. And There are number 3, the nature of plants shall not recognize animal hierarchies. There is universal rights in number 4, rights to clean water, soil, and atmosphere, and such, right? And then number 8 is recognizing mutual aid across natural communities. So this bill actually resonates because it is structured in a format that we would ourselves produce in consideration of national and cultural communities. So ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which was formed on 8 August 1967 and signed in Bangkok by Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, and Thailand, and then expanded to 10 countries between 1984 and 1999, with additions of Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar, and Cambodia. It pretty much said the same thing in recognizing sovereignty, shared responsibility for economic and social stability, progress and security from external interference. So not so different from what Mancuso is doing here. So one might say that UNESCO is also founded on similar planetary notions of cooperation, preservation, and promotion in the arts, science, and culture, as are other such real science fiction consortiums like Star Trek. So the reality of such design ideals is, of course, dependent on many factors which bear discussion, and it is here that I'd like to introduce such aesthetic consideration set in a forest recognized by UNESCO, as featured in the work of Zheng Bo, who is an eco-queer artist of ethnic Bai heritage. Zheng Bo's work features the beech forest Grumsin, located in the northeast of Berlin, which is considered by UNESCO to be a place of world natural heritage. It is one of the largest contiguous lowland beech forests worldwide, ironically preserved because it was a state hunting territory during the GDR, and is in the process of being returned to a primeval forest again. We are presented with a lush view of this magnificent forest, an aesthetic perspective, one might even say, of gently moving branches in a mild breeze, just enough to call attention to the liveliness of the forest, as if a breath passing through, flowing in and out. By contrasting this breathtaking view is a sobering conversation between the artist and Matthias Rillig of the Institute of Biology at Free University of Berlin. They discuss human impact on the world and our obliviousness to this impact that we may not recognize, not due to an assumption of our relative ecological importance, but also because we do not always see or visualize it, such as in the sounds we produce with our technologies and machinery, with their vibration and echoes which go deep into the ground, into the soil. A key takeaway here is the scale of our human perception as transposed upon the world, not just in terms of what is visible to us, noting that our vision is related to our human scale and biological limits of senses, but also in terms of time. The artist and his interlocutor draw our attention to the complex relations and sophisticated systems that plants produce, in particular in symbiosis and adaptation, as well as the development and evolution of these over a very long duration. This is a time frame that humans are challenged when attempting to grasp or fathom. The fact is, the history of mycorrhizal fungi goes back 430 million years ago when plants came to land. They are the same then as they are today, whereas Homo sapiens evolved and emerged about 300,000 years ago. In a way, then the planet doesn't really need us. We need it. Within the film, grasping such planetary time is likened to the theory that it's the song, not the singer. Basically, that the song persists even if the singer is long gone. So this video work will be shown between session 2 and 3 at 3:20 p.m. in this auditorium, kind courtesy of the artist. So if you have not caught this work yet, you might want to wish to do so. It is certainly worth it, and both for its conversation, ideas, and representation. But returning then to my earlier proposition on politics and ideology, the title of Zheng Bo's work refers to plant politics, as did Mancuso's mentioned earlier. And the distinction between politics and ideology might be simply defined in the former, reflecting the dynamic of justice, freedom, power, and choice, with ideology as its bedrock bedrock of beliefs, principles, and values. The application of such distinction for landscape and nature could also be made in relation to Nace's view of shallow and deep ecology. And as much as I'm suggesting this difference is worth considering, the two are nevertheless connected. And my interest then is in exploring artist perspectives and artworks that allow us to shuttle between the two and examine their interplay. Returning then once more to Alfian's question, it is in fact not as facetious as it might initially seem. How would we treat this earth if we thought of selfhood as planthood? I'm speaking faster than I thought I would be. So, as we consider this together, let me share a few final artworks to close. Okay, first we return to Angkrit, of the Sanctuary for Bovine Friends and Others. But now moving to a different plot of land in Korat in northeastern Thailand, where he plans to plant Isan native trees in an abandoned mulberry orchard at Jim Thompson Farm over the period of the next 3 years. Here, the artist is revitalizing the native forest ecosystem by planting 425 native trees of 53 species. According to the artist, the project title is inspired by the tarot card, the Seven of Pentacles, which symbolizes patience, perseverance, and the importance of acting in the present and mindfully, given that these trees and the new forest will be realized in a time frame beyond immediate gratification. In the inset image, you see the native saplings which have been grown from seeds. To me, this is an exciting image. It's full of potential. So then, from the towering beech trees of Jangpo's The Political Life of Plants and Angkrit's sprawling new forest, I would wish to wrap up in a more intimate reflection and scale with artworks by Chinese artist Tong Wenming from Chongqing, China, and Chilean artist and poet Cecilia Vicuna, also known for her fiber works and installations. With this work, Tong Wenming has us aligning our bodies to the level of the ground, to look closer at the common weed, generally found sprouting in the most unexpected of places, between cracks, and rooting themselves into even the tiniest amounts of earth. What she produces are pottery plates using the soil the weed is found growing, upon which she illustrates their casual yet immense beauty, supplemented by information on their species and name. Her work elevates these insignificant botanical beings and subverts their transient existences through baking their image into ceramic plates, even as the plates themselves still retain a certain fragility and thus point to their continued precarity. This image is taken from the presentation at a recently opened Changwon Sculpture Biennale in Changwon, South Korea, curated by Siwon Hyun. The other work by Cecilia Vicuna returns us to the form of the seed in their drawings with a poem titled On Behalf of Seeds. The text is not quite legible in the image, so I'll read it out to close. On behalf of seeds. I proposed a day of the seed to Salvador Allende, seed beds greening on the rooftops and squares into forests and gardens, cities and fields into Edens. Allende laughed and said pensively, maybe by the year 2000. Every year I gathered and planted seeds. When the small trees reached 20 cm, I gave them away. The seeds steps. Gathering many seeds in one place to watch over seeds. Only a collective gesture of love can turn back destruction. The forest cut down and burned. The seed has waited all this time to seed. Sprouting and waiting they are. Some wait 3,000 years, others a few minutes. Keepers of an inner time, they know when to jump. Some have parachutes, others wait. Every seed is a spaceship, a nomad planet waiting to sprout. So thank you for being very patient listeners of my musing on trees. And thanks to the artists for the inspiring works. Thank you.
谢谢叶德金总监的演讲与分享。
Okay, thank you, Jun, for the wonderful talk. So now we will move on the discussion section, and then I would like to respond a little bit to your talk, and I was particularly inspired by your discussion on ideology as the foundation of beliefs, principles, and values. I would like to consider this from the perspective of human spirituality. In this age of consumerism, even ideologies can become consumed. Yeah, and then with our society constantly creating nature experience to convince our consumers they are contributing to the dialogue on ecological crisis. Yeah. So in the work of the artist you shared, that we can see a critical reflection together with a poetic gesture and a sense of humanity. Yeah. And some artists explore alternative perspectives by returning their own cultural context, challenging mainstream narratives. So I see this as a process where artists are guiding us towards a reconstruction of spiritualities. So I think that's something touched me a lot. And I have some questions prepared for you. Yeah. But before that, I would like to invite Zoe to share some of her thoughts on Jun's talk. So that will give you a moment to catch your breath. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Feng-Rong, for sparing some time for me. And thanks, Jun, for your very comprehensive and very inspirational presentation. I think it's amazing to see that the artists that you just mentioned, they're actually from different cultural backgrounds with different approaches of making artworks, but they all share the same ideology with a rather mutual or relational perspective towards ecology. Human beings as an organism is merely a knot in a biospherical net that we cannot ignore the influences to our counterpart in the natural, especially with human behaviors such as like civilization, industrialization, and urbanization. And yet we need to include the consideration or try to foresee the reactions from different species, even in a rather artificial environment that we are now at. And some of the art projects and artworks mentioned in previous sharing reminds me of the art practices of artists from Taiwan. So I would like to take this chance to provide some local perspective. The first artist I would like to introduce is Hsieh, and she was born in Kaohsiung in 1966 and dies at the age of 47 due to cancer. She believes artworks should reflect the subjects in an ever-changing environment and reflect how the subject interacts with behaviors. In her renowned participatory project, Plants in Adverse Environments, which she co-curated with Lu Jianming, she invited participants to bring the vegetables they consumed in daily life and practice the specimen writing together. Through the workshops, we learned the origin of the spices and the journey of the seeds. The project suggested a different way to learn about the food and remind us the closest natural might just be in our kitchen. And the second artist I would like to introduce is Luo Shengwen. Luo was born in Kaohsiung in 1987 He currently based in the Netherlands. His works investigate the relationships between non-humans and contemporary society, often taking daily experiences as the point of departure. In his recent project, Feel, he it's difficult to pronounce Feel. He researched the trade and transportation of European eels from East Atlantic coastal countries to East Asian countries, where the main consumers are. And usually the eels are kept in a black box with their natural enemy during the shipping. Shen-Wen and Yifei Chen, they then created a space that's not meant for humans. We can see that audiences, they need to try to overcome the whole walkthrough. And the space is filled with series of interactive devices that translates the unfortunate experiences of these eels into something that we humans can understand. We can take these cases as an invitation or suggestions to practice a new recognition of other species in our living environment, either by relearning them in an unconventional way or putting ourselves in their shoes. I would like to echo the question Jun just raised in previous speech. How would we treat this earth if we thought of selfhood as planthood? I think this is the question we need to keep pondering. And I hope these artists' works inspire us to pay more attention to ecological issues and take actions. I believe that only when we truly realize the interconnectedness of all beings can we find a way to live in harmony with nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. So you got enough rest?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I have some questions. The first would be, since you mentioned the distinction between the political nature of landscapes and ideological nature of the natural world, and how do you see this distinction playing out in contemporary curatorial practice, especially in regions experiencing rapid environmental degradations? Yeah.
Well, the short answer is I have no idea because it is complicated.
Yeah.
And maybe addressing a few things that was mentioned before I come around to how this plays out in a curatorial space. You mentioned earlier about ideology, like even consumption, right?
Yeah.
And I think these are very fundamental issues to discuss, and the opportunity to discuss it even within the context of art and exhibitions and artist practices is a very interesting space. It's not to say that consumption is bad, you know, we have to consume to stay alive.
Right.
But what does it mean to consume? And so that's when the ideological differences come in, and that's interesting. And I also wanted to make a point that I really appreciated your examples. I like what the artists are doing. The thing is, artists working with plants is not new. Artists have always worked with plants. But the question that I'm asking, and I guess through the artists I'm working with are asking also, is what does it mean for us now to work with plants? You know, in a situation, in a environment, in a crisis that we are kind of responsible for also.
Right.
And then leading to what you are asking about the curatorial then, it's very difficult to maybe even put this into practice because many of the artworks, if they may be represented in paperworks and say the ceramic pieces, and that enters into an exhibitionary space very easily, right? But there are other projects which do not, like Ankrit's Isan project. I can show you 2 photos, and maybe you can go and visit that one day if you're ever in Isan in Thailand. But what does it mean for this to be art? I don't know. I don't have the answers. There are works which cannot enter exhibition spaces, will not become popular eco-tourist sites. That's the antithesis of some of these ideologies also, right? So, in that sense, thinking about ideology within a curatorial method does not necessarily make your life very much easier. It probably makes it harder. Yeah. That did not answer.
No, yeah, it does reply to my questions. Yeah. So, Zoe, feel free if you want to add something. Yeah.
Maybe I can add one bit too. So there was the work with the mouse deer.
Yeah.
And when it came about from a problem that we were having with, well, firstly a tree that I could not plant into a garden I did not have. So I fostered it out to an artist who was supposed to take it home and put it in her family's land, but she didn't. And then she took it back and made it into an artwork, which was not completed. And then the space needed the land back, and so they told the artist, you cannot leave your tree here. So then she says, go call June. And suddenly it's now my problem again. And so we were having the Biennale, and we thought, okay, we'll make this a Biennale project. We will find a space for it. Of course, we had to find the most difficult space to put a tree, which is on an island elsewhere in southern part of Singapore. So the whole exercise involved a crane, basically like a trawler or ship. We had to plan the day when we were going to move the ship because of low tide. We only had like 3 hours. And the ship that had the crane and the tree had to travel from the north part of Singapore to the southern part. Hopefully the weather would hold up. We had 3 hours once of high tide when we can bring the tree and the crane off onto the island, go to the space, dig the ground, put the tree back in, bring the crane back out, and get out before the tide goes too low and the boat can't go out anymore. So that became the curatorial exercise in a way, in order to realize, a project like this. And even then, it is plagued with all sorts of other uncertainties. So the tree is now sitting on Lazarus Island in the southern part of Singapore, and we have a gardener for it.
Oh.
Because it's not our land, and we are obligated to maintain the space so that people can visit. And so the tree has a gardener, and we'll see what happens in time.
Yeah.
And it's for how long since?
We don't know. Oh, well, how long?
Since the planting action.
Okay, so I adopted the tree in 2014. We moved the tree over in 2022. It's still there.
And by this, you also, it's an extraordinary experience, I have to say. Yeah. But I just want to reply also to Feng-Rong's question that also with the session this morning, I think what we're trying to do is not only in the museum or in the biennial itself, but also to see how biennials or museums or our works can actually try to involve the environment, especially the society that we're in. Yeah. So take this case, I think the gardener, of course, he has to take care of a lot of different plants. And for this particular one that took a lot of his attention, which also helped build a different relationship for the gardener and the plant itself. Yeah, I think that's very beautiful.
Yes. No, that's actually very fascinating once you start going down this rabbit hole of searching out artists who are making works in relation to this. So there are many artists who all want to be farmers. I find that very interesting, right? All over. I mean, you're talking about the land with, with Rikrit and the Thai artist there. Ankrit was actually a student when he was helping out with the land when it first started. So, and then there are other artists who are trying to revive spaces in all sorts of different ways, and it's telling what it means for us in a very fundamental level. Yeah.
They're also expanding the definition of being an artist.
Oh, yes. So I also had a point actually in relation to that about transdisciplinarity, and maybe that goes back to Ho's point again, of being in the art world, but also being very conscious of what's going on around us. And that includes at the natural level, the world of our environment, and that means working with a lot of scientists, working with a lot of information that we may not naturally have because we're studying art history. And I feel that is an important aspect of the curatorial practice today. If you're interested in subjects like this, you will end up having to deal with these other bodies of knowledge and how you're going to use that or present it within a space. And besides plants, I mean, there's a lot of ecological projects going on right now, whether it's with oceans or rivers, with land, and all of them are finding different mechanisms to present these things while balancing the artistic and the scientific or the other disciplinary practices and knowledges that are part of this.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's difficult because even Ankrit never thought of the land as an artwork.
Yeah. And since both of you talk a lot about the relationship between art practice and social realities, and you also mentioned that curating practice is not just for arts. So my next question would be kind of related to this. So in your presentation, you emphasize collective action and awareness as key responses to the climate crisis. So what role do you believe curators and artists should play in bridging the gap between art and environmental activism to inspire tangible changes?
That's a very complex question.
It is.
Yeah. I do think it is important, and maybe that's where the point of ideology comes in, is that it comes from a certain foundation of beliefs and values, from which you respond to as an artist or as a curator to want to do these things, to enable, to facilitate, to write about it, to contextualize, to even figure out the mechanisms, right? And all the obstacles that you're going to find along the way to produce something like this. So there's a lot of that experimentation, and it's very creative in that sense also, I feel. But because it's also ideology at some level, it will encounter that resistance too. And then the artistic space maybe also becomes that space to negotiate what is the values of a community, right? Because not everyone's going to agree that the ecological should be valued in this way in relation to, say, humans. That itself is a very specific position that people like, the philosophers I've mentioned, Arnes and the Norwegian and also Fukuoka, they basically went off into lands and, like Arnes has this cabin in a very isolated place and was just living there and writing. And Fukuoka had his own kind of school, where he was teaching these farming methods. But they become the places of the converted. It didn't. The reason why I bring them up also, and I think it's interesting because they are not that visible in a general sort of way, which means they're not the dominant ideology. Yeah. So there is that space also to negotiate and think about our ideological frameworks, our assumptions, perhaps within the exhibitionary and artistic space. And that's the difference between the shallow and the deep ecology, right? The shallow ecology for our nails is, I'm going to save the planet by recycling cups. The deep ecology is something else. You know, it's not just about that move. It's a lot more complicated. And to me, this is an interesting space when I see artists entering into it, because then we can travel with them and try to explore our own assumptions that we may not be conscious of. You know, which is fine. We are product of our own time, our own context, and our own knowledge systems too. So, but that's where the artwork and the exhibitionary space could push this a little further for in a situation that is going to affect all of us.
Okay, so before we open the floor for question, I have one last question. Okay, because I work also in institutions, so I will always to perceive those questions from the institutional perspective. So my question would be, how can museums or cultural institutions incorporate these ideas into their long-term planning and public engagement strategy, especially in urban setting? Because you just mentioned Fukuoka or the other person, they kind of work in the field or in the nature. So, but as the museum that we, usually that we're sitting in the city. So, yeah, how do we go on with those matters?
Well,
do you want to open?
Yeah, we can open up. We can open up for suggestions also.
And then we come back to you.
Yeah, but I mean, within the context of a building that's a museum, obviously we have the spaces to bring whatever material we can into it, and to create the points of access and mediation, whether in text, in publishing, in talks, in bringing in even there are scientists, and having that conversation within the space. So that's always possible. But yes, you're right. And to some extent, the experience of being there counts also. So maybe it's about going out into the world again. And art, if we look at how artists, many artists practice their, at a very fundamental level, their interest is outside of the museum.
Right.
So it's a re-entering into life itself, into, the everyday kind of politics and dynamics that, where the art and the art world is not an isolated space. And protected and,
Thank you. Okay, so we have less than 10 minutes left. So now we will open the floor for questions. So please give the microphone.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anna, and thank you for your beautiful presentation, Ms. Yip. May I call you Ms. Yip? Yes. So actually, I am a little bit nervous right now because I'm not an artist, I'm not a curator, but at my heart, I think I'm a writer. And I think I should stand up. And actually, for the last 10 years, I have been working in international giant technology company as a brand manager. And I want to share my struggle with all of you because today's topic is about our environment. And you can hear my breath right now because I'm super nervous. And for the past 1.5 years, I have been working in Japan, Tokyo. And my neighbor, she's a environmental law professor who works in Tokyo. And I was living in the suburban of Tokyo, which pretty near the nature. I can go to the riverbank for a walk, just like maybe 5 minutes. So one day I walked with my French environmental law professor neighbor to the riverbank, and we talked about nature. Of course, we talk about nature. And ironically, because I work in the tech, she works in the environmental law. And I was like, I need to come out, I feel I have the eager to come out to her, say, I really don't like technology, but out of no reason, I work in tech. And I'm responsible for the brand narrative and ESG topics. And my French friend, she said, yeah, and now I teach young children in university about nature, about environment conflicts, and I am so sad. And I say, I am too. I'm so sad as well. So actually, I studied literature analysis and history back in university 20 years ago. So I told my French professor friend, I say, how about we tell stories? How about we grown-ups? We admit that, yeah, we fuck up the earth. And let's do something for it. Let's bring maybe art, narrative, or, literature back to our hardcore technology and environmental law fields. However, I have a question I want to ask Ms. Yip or maybe other panelists for myself and for my French friend, because we're still in the law area and big tech firm area. And the dilemma is we're human. We have emotions. And when I have to do all the ESG, this kind of like greenwashing actions, I feel like I'm the villain. Or not the villain, it's a very strong word, but it's very, very difficult for me because at the heart, I'm a writer, right? But I wear the corporation suit. So I'm wondering if you guys can give me some advice and on Monday I can go back to work. It's like, it's just like, I really need to talk about this, it's such a pure struggle. And I wish I could know that if you guys have an opportunity to participate like curriculum or anything else design, what action you will do for people like me and for our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Really appreciate your sharing and very glad to hear how you feel also about the planet. As you were speaking, I had a few points come to mind. And first, I want to reassure you that you're perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong or villainous about you. And we are all just as complicit as you are, so don't imagine we are in the different levels here. We're all in this together, okay? So, but I wanted to, there was one more writer, philosopher that I did not bring in yet that I had been thinking about and reading, and his name is William Cronon, and he's written, I believe it's called The Problem of Wilderness. It's a text that I think is very interesting because he's coming into the ecological, ideological equation from a different angle from, say, Arnaise and Fukuoka. Because you could also say that Arnaise and Masanobu Fukuoka are real idealists, right? William Cronon is a bit more, not so idealistic. But he also made a very important point, I feel, which is that we romanticize wilderness. And that can be a problem too. When we imagine that the wilderness that's out there is this beautiful space and is so precious, and we make it sacred to the point where we don't know what we're doing with it anymore, and then it creates this very strange binary. So he cautions us from also treating nature that way. Like, yes, it is important, but we may need to be careful about reaching a point where it it becomes almost a taboo in some ways of how we're going to deal with it, right? And his argument in the end, in this particular text, is to suggest looking at what we can do with nature closer to us, not in this abstract notion out there that it's of this wondrous wilderness that we must achieve, you know. It's not that, but to be more realistic about it. So that's one part. But I also wanted to then address your more immediate question of what are you going to do on Monday? So, artists are very interesting. They come up with interesting perspectives and ways of thinking outside what the current conditions might be. And I don't know the company you're in, but there have been cases in the past where companies invite artists to come in and work alongside with them. Early examples, and this is not an ecological example, and this is a tech example. Xerox Labs was one of the first companies out there that started inviting artists, and they would basically just give the artist a table. You can do whatever you want, and the artist starts to interact with the people in the company, right, and observe. And maybe something comes out of it. It's not an art project. It's just to be in the presence of another perspective, right? But opening that space without forcing it, without throwing everything out, right? And I know of other artists. Okay, there's another group called Primer, and they are from Denmark. And they also made a deal with our water filtration company to basically give them a space inside their warehouse as their artist studio. And so they would spend their time, doing little programs, just interacting with people, and then see what happens, right? So my point being, it's not black and white like that. We have to find collective solutions. Yeah, and maybe you can also write.
Thank you, Anna, for your sharing. And I have to confess that I had exactly the same struggle with you, especially when I obtained another role in my life, becoming a parent. That makes me much more aware or guilty in some ways of living in our current society. And this might sound very simple or very little, but what I tried to do was I tried to re-identify my own relationship with all the objects that I'm going to touch or use or consume every day. I think by try to build a relationship with the things and that I'm surrounded, makes me feel at least emotionally slightly better. And okay, I just noticed that we're running out of time.
No problem.
Okay, and besides your question, I would like to point out that today in Jim's sharing, she pointed some ways for us to distinguish or identify what is political and what is ideological, politics and ideology. And after reading her scripts before she shared to us before the speech, I found this is also useful when I'm thinking of issues from different disciplinary. For example, when I'm thinking about the queer status or about the female status, I always question myself that my thinking or my way of thinking now, is it political or is it ideological? And I think that is also quite important learning from the presentation today for me. Thank you.
But they're also connected. So.
Exactly.
It is. Okay. Thank you both of you for sharing, and we just run out of time. So thank you, Jun, thank you, Zoe, and thank you, everybody. Thank you.